Welcome to the Matt Sager Podcast, Tuesday, October 16th. I'm Matt Sager. Do you have your Halloween costume picked out yet? I spent some time over the weekend thinking about how I would be dressed for trick-or-treating, and I've come up with something I think is so original that the costume no one is ever going to think to create it. I want to go as a sexy podcaster. I'm not really sure what that would entail. Maybe little microphone pasties. I'm not sure, but I'm a native New Yorker, okay? We have the biggest Halloween parade there is. And for me to not have a costume, even prepared, not even mentally, that is a problem. One that I'm going to have to get to work on. Toot sweet. I'd welcome any suggestions from you, by the way. Feel free to contact me via email, matt@mattsager.com, call 646-535-4788, or use any of the other social media ways to get in touch with me that I'll give out at the end of tonight's show. I did want to talk about, just loop back around to a story I've talked about a bunch of times on this podcast, because the story has come to its conclusion with the happiest of endings, talking about the Music Modernization Act, which I first mentioned in an episode of this podcast titled, You Can't Be Serious, XM.
You can't be serious, XM.
And then once the Senate got their act together, and over the protestations of SiriusXM and Live Nation CEO Greg Maffei, they passed the bill. So all that remained was for President Trump to just give it his signature and make it official. And let's be honest, what was once it's headed to the president with the House and Senate both agreeing to do it, nothing could possibly go wrong. We're not actually living in an age where that is currently the case. All kinds of things can go wrong. There are way too many cooks in the kitchen, and most of them are some kind of crazy. But the Music Modernization Act did pass and was signed by President Trump on Thursday, October 11th. And this is great. It's a three-part bill. And not to dunk again on SiriusXM Live Nation CEO Greg Maffei, I feel I've taken enough punches at the guy, and not only don't I know him, we run in similar enough circles that it could very well be the case that I find myself at an event with him and find him to be an incredibly charming guy, so I really don't want to attack him. But it is ridiculous that he received this letter signed by over 150 of the artists and their management and their representatives asking Greg Maffei to stop being the one guy, the only last standing bastion, trying to prevent this legislation that only serves to help artists make sure that they're properly paid for the work that they've created and that you're profiting from. Legislation which also, by the way, is very much a two-way victory. It makes things a lot easier and ultimately, in the long run, a lot cheaper for streaming services and companies like SiriusXM. But they wrote him this letter. Again, it was spearheaded by the notorious bully, Sir Paul McCartney, and of course CEOs of major corporations, who essentially hold monopolies on the entire music industry by virtue of being the CEO of both SiriusXM and Live Nation. They're well known for their innocence and being very gentle souls. So mean old Paul McCartney and 150 other mean old musicians like Flo and Eddie of the Turtles, Fleetwood Mac, Aerosmith. I mean, just everyone in rock music knew that this was wrong, that this was untenable, and that it was going to need to be addressed. And they all co-signed this letter, and this dumbass Greg Maffei responded with an open letter of his own. Granted, not signed by him, signed by the entity of SiriusXM, but clearly from Maffei. Talking about how deeply hurt he was by this letter that 150 artists wrote to him, asking him to, they didn't even say, you're being an asshole, you're holding up the bill that is going to help both of us. They merely said, we're asking you to be on the right side of history. And he said it was mean, it was stinging, it was such and such. It was none of those things. That's very dishonest of him. But what is more troubling about his opposition to it, thinking about it, now that the bill has officially been signed into law, I've had some second thoughts, freed from the emotion and the tension of it all, about why SiriusXM and Greg Maffei would feel as though this bill would be something to fight. The reason that every other streaming service and every other electronic sales channel that this affects, there's a reason that they were all very happy with the bill. It's not about giving a ton of money to the artists, and that therefore those who stream and distribute it somehow suffer or are shortchanged. That's just not the case. It's not even about taking away some just absurd amount of money that they can withhold from these artists that they need to keep in their coffers. This is money that they're spending now on licensing certain albums but not others, licensing albums that were created before X contract was signed but after Y contract was signed, getting the streaming rights to everything that the artist did on this label but not on that one. And the amount of money that is being spent on trying to get that library in place, along with the ridiculous amount of hours that the programming and production and sales teams have to sacrifice to try and get this stuff working, all those problems now have been solved for SiriusXM. So the only reason I can see them having protested this bill is a mindset of this is short money. They're not in this for the long term. Part of their strategy, seemingly in opposing the Music Modernization Act, their whole strategy is to have a door left open for taking the money and running, as if they see some sort of meteor crashing toward their business. And, look, I've said a couple things about SiriusXM. One, that I've had personal experiences there that I was not thrilled with. Two, that I've got lots of good friends there who I like quite a lot, but mostly thinking about them from an unemotional perspective. It's as though they failed to anticipate, and they probably did, just how ubiquitous streaming music would ultimately become, and how much better that would be at what it does than what SiriusXM could ever provide. You know, with their satellites that are in constant need of maintenance and that drop out entirely in large parts of the country. And they're still relying on radio programming, which is, look, in the days of radio, we could happily live under the illusion that people were happy to not have freedom of choice. The truth is that's not really the case. What it was they were happy to sit through an hour of garbage music, hoping to catch maybe 2 or 3 songs that they really like, as there are a captive audience stuck in their car or in a public listening space where everyone was tuned to the same radio station, etc. Because, much like television before cable, they were a literal captive audience, almost prisoners of FM and AM radio. And satellite radio opened up a very big door, but not nearly as big as the one that was opened up when iTunes opened their doors. And since then, there's of course Spotify and Pandora and Amazon Music and any number of ways, and podcasts like mine, which you can download through the Apple Podcasts app, or Google Play, or Stitcher, or Blueberry, or any number of podcast downloading methods that you can get on demand at your leisure. And you can keep them downloaded on your device of choice to play back anytime you like. And in addition to the biggest library and the most convenience, you don't have to carry around one clunky, semi-functional radio to do this. Any smartphone or tablet will let you do all of this stuff, as will many of your smart home speakers. Lots of TVs have this built in. You know, Sirius is starting to look kind of like a dinosaur when you look at your real entertainment options. So I do feel as though their opposition to the MMA is a sign that short money is on their mind. I don't know this to be true. Look, another thing I've said about SiriusXM, which I really want to stress here, is that I am not an insider, and therefore I'm not operating on any sort of inside information. But if I were invested in SiriusXM, and if I'd had the thoughts I've had these last few days, that the smoke having been cleared and the Music Modernization Act having been passed, why SiriusXM fought against it so hard when, in the long run, it's going to save them money. And it's immediately going to begin saving them time and man hours and efficiency. It is a really two-way street victory, unless you're thinking you need a big sack of money to go run someplace because things are about to collapse. So I'm not advising anyone to do anything, and I have no insight to do as such. But based on what I perceive, again, if I were a shareholder, which I most definitively am not, I'd probably be thinking about selling, or at the very least, calling the company up and trying to have some sort of discussion about this. Especially since, you know, in the letter he wrote in response to what he called this stinging attack by mean old bully Paul McCartney, who loves to pick on helpless CEOs. This is, of course, a well-known fact. CEOs everywhere live in terror of former Beatles, who are known for their brutality. But in his response to their, quote, stinging attack, end quote, he said, "It's not as if we're opposed to the entire bill. We're only concerned with 3 components." And again, this is a 3-part bill. So the 3 components he was arguing against were the Music Modernization Act, which streamlines the process of music licensing so that it's easier for rights holders to get paid when their music is streamed online. They don't have to wait, they don't have to fight, they don't have to try to contact you a million different times in a million different ways. They just get paid when their music is played. Very simple for all parties. And then part 2 is the Classics Act, which is simply about compensating legacy artists for their songs, their service, and their important contributions to society. This is aimed at artists whose music has been recorded before 1972, artists who have long had a very difficult time, just ridiculously difficult, getting paid for their music as it's played, streamed, and as corporations like SiriusXM, as for example, profit from them. These include recording artists who SiriusXM has entire channels dedicated to playing their music, and yet they've still had a difficult time getting paid for basically a large chunk of SiriusXM's business model. So they're finally going to get paid without difficulty. But it's not as though this is money that... They're not taking money away from SiriusXM. This is not some either-or issue. Because here's another big part of the bill. AMP, the allocation for music producers, which does a couple things. It ensures that producers and engineers get improved royalties when their recordings are used on satellite radio and online radio and any other streaming service, and this is the first time producers have ever been mentioned in copyright law, by the way. But here's where it gets really good for Greg Maffei if he thinks he's going to be around for a while, which I would hope he does. You can buy the licenses for entire music libraries of any given artist. So rather than getting all of Hendrix's Arista albums and nothing else, rather than getting everything that the Beatles did prior to founding Apple, rather than only able to access the Rolling Stones on Virgin but not at ABCO, you understand, you can now say, I want all the Rolling Stones music. And for a reasonable price by any standards, you can now purchase all that music, the license to all of it. This makes life easy for everybody. And the amount of time and money that saves SiriusXM makes it very much worth it for them and makes me really wonder now. You know, at first, my understanding of all this was not as comprehensive as it is now. And so I was like, oh, SiriusXM's being greedy because of course they are. But now it's like, SiriusXM is being greedy. Why? It doesn't really help them unless they are really looking for an escape hatch, and why would they? So this is not to spread any kind of rumor or speculation, it's just me telling you how I'm thinking. It strikes me as quite odd that all these other companies put up very little resistance from the start, and then once they saw the details of the deal and everything that it entailed, they all fell in line quite quickly, and not because they're afraid of the government or the music industry, but because it seemed fair and it seemed like they'd be compensated every bit as much as the artists. This is really a victory for everybody. But my speculations about SiriusXM aside, and that is really all they are, I need to really stress that. But I don't know. As long as I'm speculating, if I were the CEO of SiriusXM, unless they know something I really don't, I would look at the atmosphere around me and at the fact that I get pretty much all my music through Apple or Spotify or Amazon. I mean, gosh. You don't even have to use any of those. I've got a wonderful app for all of my OS X computers and iOS devices called Vox, V-O-X. And for $5 a month, I can upload all of my music, be it CDs I've ripped, MP3s I own, stuff I bought. I can upload it all to the cloud, and this includes formats that the native iPhone players don't support, like the great FLAC, free lossless audio codec, and every format is supported. And for $5 a month, I can listen to every album and song I've ever owned. And every time I buy something new, I can upload it to Vox. And I make my own playlists, play what I want, when I want. My phone or tablet or computer effortlessly connects to any one of a billion Bluetooth devices, speakers, etc. I can have my music playing through a speaker at home, then jump into a car and have it playing through my car stereo. The SiriusXM radio is a big clunky radio. It's much less big and clunky than it once was, but, you know, it's like, remember how differently you started seeing television after you first saw a TiVo? You're like, oh, I don't have to sit through these freaking commercials. That is when the viewer really became a force to be reckoned with, when the networks had to step up their game and the cable networks had to start providing really quality content too. Because suddenly, it was like movable type for the serfs. Viewers had options. They had power, and they understood now that technology was going to continue to empower them. And that's the case with music, too. So I hope, you know, radio does mean a lot to me. Just because I'm not currently practicing it, it is something that has meant a lot to a lot of people. And if it is just the natural course of things that radio is doomed to sort of die in my lifetime, then so be it. But I don't think that's the case. I think it could be saved, and I would like to think that that's something that they're working on over at SiriusXM. They're the ones who've got to do it. And one way in which they could facilitate this is by having a more diverse programming selection. I know they've got 150 channels, but they don't have a single standout show. I know that Howard's arrival there, Howard Stern, made the merger happen, and for a few years was very exciting radio. But that's not currently an exciting radio show. The Jim and Sam radio show is fine. I can't listen long enough for a whole show. It's just not that good. And there are also people there playing 4-hour music air shifts. Admittedly, they're not there for 4 hours like I was when I used to do these shifts. They're voice tracking. But some of these jocks, they're not getting paid at all. So there isn't a culture that fosters and rewards good radio over there right now. And I don't know if they're aware of how important it is for them to do well, how important that is for the future of broadcasting. They came in to disrupt it and shake things up and create new opportunities for listeners and creators and broadcasters, and they've done that. Now they need to keep it. They need to build on that foundation and keep that foundation solid. So my hope and wishes for SiriusXM are that they embrace the Music Modernization Act and that they fight for the life of radio, starting with the life of their own streaming service. Because they owe it to their listeners, they owe it to radio, the medium that birthed them and from which they took their business model, and they owe it to all the great radio talent who they got working there and all of the radio superstars who they could and should be discovering and grooming. That's my take anyway. But again, shake that ass, because the Music Modernization Act has passed. Thanks a lot for hanging out with me tonight. Can't wait for another week full of shows. Get in touch with me any way you like. I'd love to have you on the show, answer your questions, what have you. Email matt@mattsager.com, call 646-535-4788, or hit me up on Twitter @MattSager. And on Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager. Facebook, I'm The Matt Sager, and my voiceover page there is Matt Sager VO. And for even more social media links, along with my articles, some blog posts, more contact info, and my voiceover reels, back episodes of this podcast, and tons more, head on over to mattsagervoiceover.com.